What if your entire life changed because you answered a phone that wasn't yours? And what if, in just 5 minutes, the world stopped seeing you as a waitress and started seeing you as the one who could save everything? Eliza Hart wasn't looking for a miracle. She was just trying to make it through another shift, balancing bills, caregiving, and the quiet ache of a life paused too early. But one rainy night, in a quiet cafe, she heard a man struggle with a foreign language on the phone and chose to speak. One sentence, one translation, and suddenly, she wasn't invisible anymore. But what happens when that one moment spirals into an invitation she's not ready for? A flight, a boardroom, a billion-dollar deal, and a man who sees in her something she's spent her whole life hiding value. Can someone who's spent years surviving learn how to belong in a world of power and pressure? Can you trust someone who opens doors you didn't believe were meant for you? And what if love finds you not in fairy tales, but in the quiet spaces where courage whispers louder than fear? If you've ever believed that your voice, no matter how small, could matter, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more tales where one small act rewrites everything. Now let's begin. It was just past 9 on a quiet Tuesday evening when a man in an immaculate navy coat sat alone by the window of a nearly empty cafe in a small town on the outskirts of Brighton Hill. His hand gripped a phone, the voice on the other end rising in frustration, fast and urgent in a language he couldn't understand. No, please, I really don't know what you're saying. Can you stop for a moment? Just write it down or something. His tone was polite but frayed at the edges. The kind of voice someone uses when they are used to being in control until suddenly they're not. He pulled the phone slightly away from his ear, closed his eyes, and let out a long breath, like he was hoping the noise might turn into clarity if he waited long enough. That's when she spoke. They won't send it in writing. The voice was soft, almost hesitant. He turned his head sharply. A young woman stood beside him, wearing a pale gray apron that had faded from too many washes. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a simple twist, and in her hand was a small order pad. Her eyes were steady, though cautious. I understand Russian, she said, not boasting, just offering. If you'd like, I could try to help. He looked at her, only for a moment. Then he passed her the phone. She lifted it gently to her ear, listening first, not interrupting. When she spoke, her voice lowered, smooth and even, the kind that commands attention not by volume, but by calm. She asked questions, paused, wrote something quickly on the edge of a paper napkin, using a black pen she pulled from her apron. The conversation didn't last long, perhaps 2 or 3 minutes at most. Then, she handed the phone back. With quiet assurance, she folded the napkin once and slid it across the table. If they receive confirmation of the 4th clause by 5 in the evening, Warsaw time, they'll proceed with the agreement, she said. Otherwise, they'll consider the offer declined and cancel the licensing terms. He stared at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected to find here, in a sleepy roadside cafe. You just saved me, he said, barely believing it himself. I'm glad I could do something useful, she replied, with a small smile that flickered but didn't linger. She began to turn. Wait. He reached into his coat and pulled out a finely embossed business card. Ronan Blake, Chief Executive, Blake & Keene Ventures. She accepted it slowly, glancing from the elegant script to his face. I'm Eliza, she said quietly. I just serve tables here. He didn't laugh. He didn't correct her. He just studied her a moment longer. If you ever want something that matches what you're clearly capable of, call that number. Then he stood, nodded once, and left. She stood there for a while, in one hand, the business card, on the table, a folded napkin, and a phone that was no longer ringing. Outside, the rain had eased into a hush, the air thick with the kind of stillness that comes before something shifts. She placed the card gently into her back pocket, tucked away the napkin, and returned to wiping down the counter. But something inside her had changed. She didn't know it yet. But that brief exchange, a language she hadn't used since college, a voice she almost didn't trust to speak, would be the first small spark in a story that would grow far beyond her quiet life. The apartment sat quietly above a bakery on the second floor of an aging brick building, its windowsills chipped and crooked, the faint smell of bleach clinging to the curtains like a memory that wouldn't let go. Inside, Eliza moved gently through the narrow hallway. The living room was dim, lit only by the glow of a small lamp. On the couch, nestled in pillows, her younger sister May lay half asleep, a paperback resting loosely in her lap. "Is it morning or night?" May asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's late," Eliza said, dropping her bag and kneeling to adjust the tubing on the IV stand beside the couch. "But you're okay. I brought you that chicken soup. You like the one with the tiny pasta shells." May gave a distracted smile. The exact kind," Eliza answered, keeping her voice even while her chest clenched tight. 3 part-time jobs, 8 medications, rent due in less than 5 days. Everything in their life was hanging by threads. Eliza tightened every single day with her own hands. Still, after May drifted off again, Eliza opened her worn notebook, its cover creased, pages marked with ink and memories. She flipped to where she left off. Russian grammar, a few half-finished idioms, phrases she hadn't needed to say in years. Her fingers paused over a quote she'd copied once in college, back when the future still felt wide open. She read it aloud, gently, into the quiet. "Even the longest night will end." Then, without changing clothes, she curled up in the old armchair beside May and fell asleep. It was almost 7 when her phone buzzed. 2 missed calls, 1 message. "Good morning, Miss Eliza. This is Tessa, assistant to Mr. Ronan Blake. You are invited to a meeting today at 3 o'clock. The address is 36 Oakbridge Lane." She sat upright, reread the message once, then twice, then a third time. She had expected maybe a quick thank you. Not this. Not something that sounded official. That sounded like possibility. For the next few hours, she paced and second-guessed everything in her tiny closet. What do you wear to a meeting you didn't know existed? She settled on a charcoal blouse, dark jeans, and the only shoes she owned that didn't have worn-out soles. Oakbridge Lane was quiet and lined with towering trees. At the end of the road stood a set of sleek iron gates. A uniformed guard checked her name and let her through without a word. She followed the path until it opened into a private airstrip at its center. A gleaming white jet rested quietly, engines low and waiting. Eliza stopped walking. A woman in a Navy uniform approached her with a kind smile. "Miss Eliza, please follow me." "Wait, I thought..." "This was just a meeting," she stammered. "It is on board." Her feet moved before her thoughts could catch up. She climbed the narrow stairs, heartbeat echoing louder than the engines. Inside, the cabin was all cream leather and polished wood, the kind of stillness that made you feel like you shouldn't touch anything. And at the far end, Ronan Blake stood near a counter, sleeves rolled up, a ceramic mug in his hand. "You didn't seem like someone who drinks coffee," he said, offering her the mug. "It's hot chocolate, the real kind from Belgium." She took it automatically, still stunned. "I thought this would be a conversation, maybe in a cafe." He smiled slightly. "We're heading to Oslo. The meeting with the Russian partners was moved forward by 2 days, and I want you there." She blinked. "I'm not. This isn't what I do. I pour drinks. I work nights at a care unit. My sister." He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to slow the panic. "You're also the only person I've seen in over half a year who made a Russian negotiator laugh mid-call. You understand nuance. You bring presence. I don't need someone with credentials and 10 years of deals. I need someone who listens. I need you." She looked down at the cup in her hands, then up at him. "You don't even know me. I know what matters. You showed up. You acted. And now you're here." The door behind them sealed shut with a soft, pressurized hiss. The hum of the engines deepened. "And if I say no," she asked quietly. He tilted his head. "You won't. Because something tells me when it counts. You stay." Eliza eased into the nearest seat, her breath shallow, fingers still trembling slightly as they wrapped around the now lukewarm cup in her hands. She looked down at her clothes' dark blouse, faded jeans, clean but ordinary. "What am I even supposed to wear to a negotiation?" she asked, half to herself. Ronan glanced at her, then offered a small, genuine smile for the first time. "You already are," he said. "You showed up. That's all that matters." She lowered her gaze, unsure what to say. The engines shifted into a deeper hum as the plane taxied toward the sky. Through the small oval window, the world began to stretch and blur, but inside her chest, things felt tight and unsteady. She didn't know what she was stepping into. Not really. But somewhere, quiet and small, a part of her had started to hope again. The jet rose steadily, leaving the coastline behind. Above the clouds, the world turned pale and silent. Silver light spilled through the windows, brushing against the cream-colored seats and polished fixtures. Eliza sat upright, stiff with uncertainty. The cup of chocolate in her hands had gone cold, but she still held it like an anchor. Her shirt, ironed earlier that morning, was now creased and pulled at the seams from hours of anxiety. Her boots made the faintest sound as she crossed her ankles, trying not to mark the spotless floor. Beside her bag on the ground, the corner of her old notebook peeked out, its spine cracked, pages dog-eared, filled with scribbled Russian notes and phrases. Across from her, Ronan scrolled through emails. He looked calm, comfortable. But every so often, his eyes drifted toward her, quiet, observing. When the aircraft hit a patch of rough air, Eliza flinched instinctively and looked out the window, feigning interest in the clouds. But Ronan noticed. Without saying anything, he stood, moved across the aisle, and reached into an overhead bin. Moments later, he handed her a wool coat, soft, neutral in color. It smelled faintly of cedar and something else, something warm and hard to name. She hesitated. "Just in case," he said simply. She accepted it, draping it over her lap. It was heavier than it looked, comforting. Then he handed her a folded napkin. "I saw you wipe your palms on your jeans earlier," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Old habit," she muttered, eyes dropping. "You're doing better than you think." He sat back down, his posture a little more relaxed now. "Ever flown before once," she admitted. "When I was around 13. It was cramped and bumpy. I didn't like it." "This one's not so bad," he replied, then added, after a pause, "But I get it. Nerves are tricky." She looked at him, surprised by the candor. "You don't seem like someone who ever gets nervous." He leaned back, arms loosely folded. "That's the illusion," he said. "People see a tailored suit, a quiet jet, and think it's armor." She let out a quiet laugh. Something in her eased. He studied her for a moment. "My mother was a translator," he said after a while. "She grew up in Riga. Taught me to count in Russian before I even knew how to write my name in English. She must be proud. She passed away when I was 17. He said quietly, "I'm sorry." He nodded. "Me too." The sound of the engines filled the quiet between them, a low, steady rhythm that seemed to hold everything still. Eliza reached down and lifted her notebook onto her lap. She opened it, fingers smoothing the edges. Inside, the pages were worn from use, lines filled with verbs and syntax, little drawings in the margins, notes layered over old dreams. Ronan noticed. "You didn't just pick that up on a whim," he said. She shook her head gently. "Started back in university. I wanted to work in diplomacy, maybe the United Nations. But life doesn't always move in the direction you imagined." He didn't speak, let her continue. "My sister had a car accident. It changed everything. I had to leave school, find work, take care of her. Language was the only piece of that dream I kept." She traced the notebook's cover with her thumb. "I kept studying, not because I thought it would lead to anything, but because it reminded me of who I once hoped to be, even when I had no idea how to get there anymore." Then she added, almost in a whisper, "I studied things I was too afraid to use," Eliza said softly, her voice barely above the hush of the engine. "But somehow, It kept me tethered to the version of myself I didn't want to lose. Ronan didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his tone had shifted lower, quieter, as if the words mattered more than usual. "I've met so many people," he said, "people who speak like the world belongs to them, but you're the first I've met in a long time who sounds like they survived it." Eliza turned to him, startled. "You're not invisible, Eliza." Something caught in her chest, not flattery, not pity, something heavier, something that sounded like truth. Ronan looked away, toward the window. "We'll be landing in about an hour. I'll walk you through everything once we're closer." She nodded, unable to speak. Her heart was still racing, but it had nothing to do with flying. Outside, the clouds were beginning to thin, and far below, the ocean curved around a city that gleamed like silver glass. The boardroom sat high above the harbor, wrapped in steel and light. Through its floor-to-ceiling windows, container ships glided across the late afternoon water like quiet shadows. Inside, the room felt heavier, formal, balanced on ceremony and careful breath. There were 5 Russian delegates seated across from them, every posture sharp, every movement intentional. At the head of the group sat Mr. Baranov, an elder statesman whose silence carried weight. Eliza sat beside Ronan, a small microphone in front of her, her notebook just slightly open. The room smelled faintly of coffee and tension. As Baranov began to speak, she listened with everything, not just to his words, but to the way he held them, the small pauses, the guarded tone, the pride woven into certain syllables when he spoke of legacy. Then she translated, clearly, calmly, matching the rhythm of his voice, the weight behind each phrase. Ronan responded in turn, measured, confident. She carried his words back across the table in flawless Russian. Her tone adjusted to suit the moment, respectful, direct, never soft, never hard, just right. When one of the younger delegates made a quiet joke under his breath, Eliza didn't translate it word for word. Instead, she rephrased it with just enough wit to mirror its tone. Ronan smiled. One of the Russians chuckled, and just for a second, Baranov's stern gaze softened. After nearly 2 hours, the meeting paused for tea. Eliza quietly reviewed her notes, flipping pages with precision. Her chest was tight, her blouse damp at the collar, but her posture never wavered. From the outside, she was still steady. Inside, her heart knocked like it might break through her ribs. By the end of the 3rd hour, the draft agreement had been provisionally accepted. All that remained was final review and signatures from both boards. Baranov stood and extended his hand to Ronan. "You have our respect, Mr. Blake," he said in Russian. Then he turned to Eliza. "But the woman beside you, she has our hearts." Ronan blinked, Eliza translated, cheeks flushed with warmth. Baranov added with a slow nod. "In business, it's rare to feel understood. She didn't just interpret our words, she understood our meaning." When they stepped outside, the sky had begun to turn gold. Rain had left the pavement shining. The city glowed. Eliza walked a few steps behind Ronan, her notebook hugged tightly to her chest. She didn't know what came next, only that something had changed. Ronan paused near the gates of a quiet park and turned slightly. "Come, walk with me for a while." They stepped under the canopy of trees. Street lamps blinked on one by one above them. The world had gone softer. "You were flawless," he said. "Finally." She let out a quiet laugh. "I was scared the entire time." "You didn't seem nervous at all," Ronan said, his voice low as their footsteps echoed along the quiet path. "That's good," Eliza replied, letting out a breath. "But I was completely." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of leaves rustling overhead. Then he glanced sideways at her. "You shifted something in my thinking today." About what he paused near a stone fountain, its surface mirroring the night sky. He looked out, then down at the water. "What it really means to be enough." He spoke slowly. "I've spent years surrounded by polished resumes, Ivy League accents, and people who bill hundreds by the hour. but not one of them ever made Baronoff smile. She looked over, unsure what to say. Ronan turned toward her, his voice softer now. "You reminded me that the best isn't always the loudest voice or the longest list of titles. Sometimes it's the one who stayed up past midnight, studying something they might never use, simply because it mattered. The one who never expected the door to open but knocked anyway." Eliza didn't speak. Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands. "You opened a door today." "Eliza, I didn't even know I had the key," she whispered. He smiled then quietly, meaningfully, and didn't say anything more. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and something inside her shifted. Not the girl who waited in the background, not just the sister, or the waitress, or the invisible helper, but a woman who had spoken and been heard. 2 days after they returned from Oslo, the rhythm of Eliza's old life had barely resumed, back at the cafe, back at May's side in the evenings. Then her phone buzzed, an email, from Blake & Keane Global, subject line offer of employment, communication strategist. Global division. Her hands shook. It was real. They didn't want her for just one translation. They wanted her, her mind, her presence, her voice for something bigger. It meant full-time work, a steady salary, healthcare, flexibility to stay close to May, and it meant something she hadn't felt in years, momentum. She said yes. By the following Monday, she stood inside a high-rise tower in the center of downtown Chicago, the 39th floor, a glass office. Her name etched on the door, Eliza Hart, communications strategist. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of motion. She collaborated on presentations for international clients, helped revise speeches for global launches, and rewrote key passages of a keynote address Ronan would later deliver flawlessly in front of European delegates. Everyone was professional, warm, even, well, almost everyone. On her first day, a woman named Dana greeted her, tall, sharp blazer, every detail curated. Her smile was polished, her tone rehearsed. "Welcome to the big leagues," Dana said. "Let me know if you need help keeping up." Eliza smiled politely, thanked her, then got to work. But small things began to shift. A file she had carefully translated disappeared from the shared drive. A client's name showed up misspelled in a draft she was sure she'd reviewed. Documents saved under her login had somehow been edited late at night. She told herself it was coincidence, until it wasn't. It happened one Thursday afternoon. A major contract meant for a Russian client she had once impressed was sent out. But the final draft included 3 subtle mistranslations. Tiny words, massive consequences. The client's response came within the hour, furious. Accusations of misrepresentation, a threat to dissolve the entire agreement. Eliza sat at her desk, staring at the forwarded message. Her pulse raced as she opened her original file. Her version was right, precise, clean. Then she opened the version that had been sent, identical in layout but not in words. Someone had changed it. Eliza stared at the screen. The draft she had submitted, the one she had checked line by line, was perfect. But the version sent to the client, it looked the same. Same structure, same formatting. But 3 words had changed, deliberately, quietly. She didn't hesitate. She walked across the floor, straight to Dana's desk. "Did you have access to this file?" Dana blinked, her expression smooth and practiced, as if nothing in the world ever rattled her. "I help coordinate final communications with clients," she said evenly. Why Eliza didn't respond, she just turned and walked away. An hour later, HR called her in. The meeting was formal, measured, careful. They didn't accuse her outright, but the message was clear. According to the digital logs, she had been the last to access the document. With the deal at risk, and no immediate explanation, they had no choice. She was placed on temporary leave pending internal review. Her fingers didn't tremble as she packed her things. But something in her chest felt like it was unraveling. When she reached the elevator, her keycard had already been disabled. That night, she couldn't sleep. May asked if something had happened. Eliza just kissed her forehead. "It's fine. Just a little mess at work. I'll sort it out. But her voice lacked conviction. The next morning, a message appeared in her inbox. Direct, simple. From Tessa, Ronan's assistant. Mr. Blake would like to see you. 9 sharp. His office. She couldn't tell if it was a summons or a quiet goodbye. Still, she went. The top floor of the building was quiet when she stepped out of the elevator. No one at the reception desk. No footsteps in the hallway. His door was already open. Inside, the lights were soft. On the edge of the desk sat a cup of hot cocoa. Steam curled upward like a question. Beside it, an envelope, her name written in dark blue ink. She picked it up, unfolded the note. If you were brave enough to stand in the storm, then today, I believe you're brave enough to stand in the stillness of your truth. She looked up. Ronan was standing by the window, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. It wasn't me, she said quietly. I know. He turned. The logs show the file was edited under your login, but the activity came from a remote access point, after hours. Dana, Eliza whispered. He nodded. We've already started an internal investigation, but right now, the optics still matter. I had to move fast. That's why the suspension, but I never doubted you. Her throat tightened. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know if you'd come back anyway, if you'd still walk in here with your head high. You did. She didn't respond. Ronan stepped forward, gently took the cocoa from her hand, and placed it back on the desk. This world. It's not always kind, he said softly, but I am still here, and I am with you. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. Not until he added, barely above a whisper. I trust you, Eliza. That has never changed, and it won't. That evening, the rain returned. It fell quietly, painting the city in silver streaks. Eliza sat by the window, her sister asleep in the next room, the soft breathing of peace nearby. She should have felt lighter. Dana had been exposed. The truth was clear, but instead, she felt hollow. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Ronan. No suit, just a dark coat with the collar turned up, his hair damp from the weather. In one hand, he held a folder. In the other, something wrapped in cloth. Thought you might want to see this, he said gently. No greetings, no explanations. He stepped inside and placed the folder on her small kitchen table. Eliza followed in silence. Inside were pages of evidence, digital traces, timestamps, records of remote edits, everything, meticulously organized, his handwriting in the margins. She leaned over the table, reading without speaking, and the weight of it all finally landed. Someone had tried to erase her, but he had followed the trail back to her truth. The folder on the table was thick with printed pages, digital logs, network traces, internal memos, annotated in Ronan's careful, angular handwriting. One page in particular was marked with a red tab. It showed the exact minute Dana had opened the document, 37 minutes after Eliza's final save. From a different terminal, a different location. She left footprints, he said quietly, and I followed them. Eliza sat down, slowly. Her fingers pressed into the edge of the table, holding her steady. Why would she do that? She asked, almost to herself. It makes no sense. Fear, Ronan answered, of becoming invisible, of being replaced. Fear turns some people cruel. She looked at him then, something breaking loose inside her. You believed me I didn't have to believe, he said. I checked. I don't put my trust in words. I trust the pattern. And yours never matched this. He slid a folded slip of paper across the table. She opened it with both hands. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in traces. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, fragile and real. A tear welled, but didn't fall. Why did you come yourself? She asked softly. You could have sent this through human resources, because truth deserves more than a forwarded file, he said. It deserves to be handed over by someone who sees you. He stepped toward the window, the room cast in the soft gold of a city rain. Then he turned back. You walked into a room that wasn't made for you. You didn't ask for anything, but when you spoke, everything shifted. She swallowed, her voice barely there. I don't know if I belong in this world of yours. Maybe not, he said, meeting her eyes. But maybe I don't belong in it either. Not if it makes space for people like Dana, but causes people like you to question your worth. He walked back to the table, placed something down in front of her with deliberate care. A bar of dark chocolate, the exact brand she used to buy only when it was on sale. And beside it, a small bottle of lavender hand cream, the kind she kept in her apron pocket during long shifts. Small things, he said. I pay attention. It was then she understood. He hadn't been testing her. He had been seeing her. Eliza rose slowly. The air between them felt thick, not with silence, but with something deeper. Recognition. He turned toward the door, but paused. I'm not here tonight to prove anything noble, he said, without looking back. I'm here because, when someone does the right thing, they deserve someone standing beside them. Then he turned his head slightly. Tonight. That someone is me. He stepped out, the door closing gently behind him. But Eliza didn't move. She stood there, heart full, eyes wet, staring at the table. The folder, the note, the chocolate, the lavender. Each one a quiet reminder that she had not disappeared. For the first time in so many years, she truly believed it. 2 weeks later, she found herself standing in a place she never thought she'd see, a villa nestled on a hillside above a still, mirrored lake in Switzerland. Stone walls wrapped in ivy, curtains fluttering like soft breath through open windows. No titles, no emails, no rushing clocks, just air and light. For a little while, it became home. The United Nations had invited key delegates to develop a new initiative, one that would bring digital education to children across the world. Eliza had been invited not just to translate, but to contribute ideas, to build, to lead. And Ronan, still sharp, still composed, seemed somehow softer here, less shielded, more present. On the third evening, after dinner, Eliza wandered into the old library. The fire crackled low in the stone hearth. The scent of leather-bound books hung in the air. Ronan was there, sitting near a window, sleeves rolled up, a book half forgotten on his lap. He didn't speak at first, but when he looked at her, there was no question, only warmth. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. No tie, just an open collar and a forgotten book resting in his lap. Its spine tilted slightly, as if even it had paused to listen to the quiet. Outside the windows, the lake darkened slowly, the sky casting long streaks of violet over the still water. Ronan saw her before she spoke, but he didn't rush the moment. This fits you, he said gently. She tilted her head, unsure what he meant. This room, this place, Geneva, you. Eliza stepped closer to the fireplace. The warmth curled around her hands, her shoulders, her breath. It's calm here, she murmured, like nothing wrong could ever reach past these walls. He nodded. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you carry that calm with you. The silence that followed didn't ask for filling. It was the kind that invited you to stay, to just exist, to be still in each other's presence. Later that night, when Eliza returned to her suite, the lights were low. On the writing desk, resting like a secret, was a small velvet box. There was no note, no signature. Inside, a fountain pen, midnight blue, silver trim, her initials engraved near the base in cursive so delicate it looked hand-whispered, to the one who doesn't just speak, but reveals. She held it in both hands, unsure if what filled her chest was ache or something gentler, something whole. Then came a quiet knock. She opened the door. Ronan stood there, no blazer, no title. Just a man, uncertain, breathing slowly. Did you like it? He asked, eyes flicking toward the pen. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she stepped forward and kissed his cheek, not to impress, not to declare anything, but to tell the truth without saying it aloud. He didn't move, didn't reach back, just looked at her like something old inside him had finally been named. She looked back, open, unafraid. Whatever had been waiting between them was no longer waiting. They didn't fall into each other that night. They didn't name it, didn't map a future. But something settled, something real. In the days that followed, they worked as if the space between them had shifted. They no longer had to speak every thought because somehow the other already understood. Over dinner, the conversation drifted away from reports and meetings. They spoke of beginnings. Ronan told her about his mother, how she used to recite poetry in Russian at bedtime, how her voice was never loud but always heard. She passed too soon, he said, and something in me went quiet with her. Eliza told him about May, her laugh before the accident, the way her eyes still lit up when the world made sense for a moment. How Eliza had learned to slow her voice, to soften her pace, just to keep pace with her sister's world. Language, she said, was the string that stitched her to herself. They never asked the question, "What are we?" They didn't need to. One morning, just before the final session of the summit, they stood in the stone kitchen of the villa, warm mugs in hand, light pouring in like morning had remembered them. Ronan reached for a folder. His hand brushed hers. He paused. "You're the first person I've ever wanted beside me," he said softly. Not behind, not following, just beside. Eliza didn't speak. She simply let her fingers rest against his for one moment longer, and that was enough. By then, the lake had begun to shimmer again. The spring sun touched its surface like glass breathing. Ripples spread slowly beneath a sky so still, it felt like even time had paused to watch. At the edge of a high cliff, surrounded by slender cypress trees, a castle stood, old stone wrapped in white roses and quiet memory, and below, a world waiting to change. The scent of lavender and lemon drifted gently through the courtyard, carried on a morning breeze soft enough to hush the world. Silk ribbons danced along ancient stone railings, and sheer white drapes lifted and fell like breath against the light. Somewhere in the distance, bells began to chime not loud, but reverent, like whispers from a place beyond time. Rows of white chairs had been carefully arranged across the cobblestone terrace. Each one held someone who had touched a piece of their story. There were diplomats and childhood friends, neighbors who once saw Eliza rushing to her night shift with coffee in one hand and hope in the other, and colleagues who had watched her rise, not through titles, but through quiet acts of clarity and courage. Phones were tucked away, eyes were open, hearts, too. They weren't just attending a wedding. They were bearing witness to something deeper, a story written between silences, now spoken aloud. Music began, soft strings swelling like breath held too long. Then Eliza appeared. She walked slowly, steadily, clothed in a gown of silk that caught the sunlight and turned it to water. No jewels adorned the hem, no lace along the sleeves. The dress was plain, honest, like her. Like the worn notebooks she once scribbled Russian phrases into late at night when the world felt too heavy. She held no bouquet. Only a single item rested in her hand, a fountain pen. Midnight blue, silver trimmed, the one Ronan had placed in a quiet box in Geneva. He waited at the altar, dressed in linen the color of early fog. His posture was grounded, still, but his eyes never left her. Not when she stepped into the courtyard, not when her hand brushed his. Not even when the officiant invited him to speak. Ronan exhaled. Then, with a voice low but certain, he met her gaze. When I met her, he said, she didn't ask who I was. She didn't ask what I owned, or where I'd flown in from. She just listened, before I even said a word. A quiet ripple of emotion moved through the guests. She answered a phone call in a language I didn't speak, and in that moment, she translated more than words. She showed me what trust actually sounds like. He paused. A small smile touched the edge of his mouth. She didn't see me as I was, but as who I could become. When it was Eliza's turn, she stepped forward without hesitation, though her pulse tapped gently against her ribs. Her voice was steady. First, she spoke in Russian. Then, in English, I promise to be your voice when yours needs rest, and your stillness when your soul just wants to feel. Her eyes glistened, but her smile never wavered. I will be the interpreter of your heart, For every day we're given. In the front row, May clapped first, slowly, deliberately. Her wheelchair was draped in soft white flowers. Her joy spilled across her face as though she had always known this day would come. Then the bells rang once more. From the balconies above, white petals fell drifting like blessings through the air. And beneath that soft shower, Eliza and Ronan leaned into each other. Their lips met, not as a performance, but as a promise. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a sentence completed, a truth, finally spoken in the language they had both spent years learning without knowing love, quiet, steady, and chosen. And somewhere far away, in a cafe once lit by neon and fatigue, where a girl once translated a stranger's desperation into understanding the story that had begun with a single word, had arrived at something even more rare, a home, not of bricks or vows, but of belonging. And in all the quiet ways, two people can learn to understand each other through pauses, through presence, through listening with more than ears. A story that began with translation found its meaning not in language, but in love. Not the love found in fairy tales, but the kind built slowly, through choices, through trust, through moments that asked nothing, but gave everything. This wasn't a tale of wealth or timing. It was a journey shaped by decisions to show up, to speak, to stay. From a dimly lit cafe where a tired girl once answered a phone call to a castle on a hill where that same girl, years later, answered a vow, Eliza and Ronan's story reminds us. Sometimes, it only takes one act of courage, one voice, one moment of kindness to change the direction of a life, maybe even two. If this story found a soft place in your heart, if it reminded you of hope, of quiet strength, of the beautiful weight of simply being seen, then we hope you'll stay with us. Here at Shining Stories, we believe in the quiet magic of second chances, of resilience, of love that grows in the stillness. And we'll be right here, bringing you more stories that speak not just to your ears, but to your soul. Your next favorite story is only one breath away. Some stories don't need grand gestures or perfect timing, just a single moment of courage, a choice to speak, to trust, to believe that even the quietest voice matters. Eliza and Ronan's journey reminds us that we don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference. We just have to be present, to show up with honesty, and to listen when it counts most. Because sometimes, the smallest acts, a translation, a glance, a gesture, can open doors we never knew were meant for us. If this story touched something in you, made you believe again in quiet strength, in second chances, and in the kind of love that grows from truth, then you're already part of what we call Shining Stories. Help us spread this light. Like the video if it resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs a little hope. And don't forget to subscribe to Shining Stories for more real, heart-deep narratives just like this. Your next story is already waiting. We'll see you there.